done anything wrong with you?
No, I don't.
Kia ora, folks. So I thought I'd put together a last-minute dive into Benjamin Doyle, who today fronted at Parliament to our media to discuss that entire controversy which we covered last week with him, with his private Instagram account, the content on that account, and the fact that he's now been quiet for the last week and a half and has finally come out from the shadows and is addressing the media. Here is what Benjamin has had to say, and I'll throughout give my perspective on these things, whether I accept it, whether I don't, whether he's answering all the right questions and so forth. Let's get straight into it.
Tēnā anō koutou katoa. I'm proud to be supported by my Green Party colleagues and leaders in the Rainbow community, Kevin, Clive and Tabby. I knew coming to Parliament that I would face prejudice and homophobia. I knew that people would not like the way I dress or speak or the causes that I advocate for. I knew that I would be under scrutiny, as is appropriate for every single person that has the privilege of this position. But I could never imagine or prepare myself to be attacked in such a baseless, personal and violent way.
He comes out the blocks saying that he never expected to be attacked in such a baseless and violent way. From what we've seen so far, the only violence has been verbal violence. And as we all know, verbal violence is a myth. It doesn't exist. It's just something that leftists invented so that they could play the victim. He's also saying baseless. In order for these things to be baseless, they would have to be based on nothing. People didn't just wake up last week and decide to start giving him crap because he's homo or whatever he wants to call himself. From what we can deduce, he's very much a male and his partner is a female. Last time I checked in the dictionary, that's not what a homosexual was. Perhaps he's also attracted to men. Maybe that's the case. But no, his position, his belief that he's a homosexual, that this is based on homophobia, is due to the fact that he calls himself queer, non-binary, they, them pronouns, and all of that jazz. That has no bearing on reality, unfortunately, and so I will be referring to him as him, not they, and being a non-binary, otherwise known as an attention seeker, does not mean that you are not a male. Okay, so stop trying to utilize the homosexual community as an excuse for why you're receiving this type of, let's say, abuse and criticism, rather than the real reason, which is that you posted stuff online which people wanted you to answer questions about because it concerned them. So let's go back to the point here. They didn't come after you because of baseless issues with homosexuals and queers and whatever. They came after you because of the content of your Instagram account in conjunction with what you advocate for and where your focus is, which, by the way, is very heavily in the sector revolving around children, be that early education for the Green Party or prior to your career in politics where you were working in high schools and stuff like that. So no, these are not baseless accusations that are violent in nature. These are accusations and concerns and questions being raised with you that you avoided for a week and a half based on stuff that you yourself posted on social media.
That my life and that of my child would be threatened. That poisonous transphobic hate and imported culture wars would be levelled against me and my community, not just by extremists online, but by individuals who hold the highest level of authority in this institution.
Here's what I take most issue with about that little segment there was he's basically accusing Winston Peters of being a transphobic, homophobic individual stirring up hate, violence, and so forth towards him for those reasons. That Winston Peters had absolutely no justification for looking at the concerns people were raising and addressing them himself. I think what Winston Peters did was more than fair. And him asking the questions that needed to be asked was something that he was doing instead of the media, because the media was silent on it for 3 or 4 days. You know, he, like everyone else on X and other social media platforms, asking those questions, myself included. So the idea that that's what Winston Peters is doing, that Winston Peters is no better than the average person in sending an email or a DM to Benjamin, sending death threats and so forth. That's ridiculous. And that's actually a very serious accusation, more serious than the accusation that Winston Peters has thrown around. Far more serious. So the hypocrisy there alone is extremely concerning. But he also makes reference to imported culture wars, as if this isn't an issue which is also relevant here. I mean, the issue against his activism is just as relevant in New Zealand as it is in the US and elsewhere. I mean, he's literally adopting an ideology which many would associate with the left. He literally subscribes to an ideology which many would associate with the US, many would associate with the beliefs of progressives in the United States, albeit it's something that's actually in some part originated here. Thank you very much, John Money. So, he can claim that this is just imported culture wars and rooted in transphobia, that it's all baseless. But at the end of the day, just because something is also an issue in another country, that doesn't mean you can dismiss it being talked about in this country because it's also an issue somewhere else. That's just you trying to deflect from the conversation and pretend like the people who are your opponents with respect to these ideological beliefs you hold are not being reasonable, are not being sincere, and should just quite frankly shut up. You're wanting to silence them instead of discussing this like an adult.
I am here to bring my full self into Parliament and to represent my communities in the most authentic way possible. This is why when I was advised by the party to delete the page before coming to Parliament, I chose not to. I can admit that I was politically naive, and we have paid a huge price for that naivety. None of this means I deserve the barrage of abuse and vitriol I have experienced. I have been fielding a significant number of threats to my life and the safety of my child and family, some of which have been so graphic and disturbing that I had been advised not to leave my house or appear in public due to real concerns for my safety. These attacks I've faced have been baseless and cruel. Queer people are not a danger to children. This is an outdated and homophobic lie.
Look, if he wants to play the card that queer people aren't a danger to children, then he and his ilk can stop playing the card that Christians and people of religious faith are a danger to children. He should stop demonizing the church for being a danger to children if he wants us to sit there and say that he is not a danger to children or queer people are not. Because as we all know, the average person who is queer is not. The average person who is a Christian is not, right? Now, there are certain ideologies which are a danger to children, even if it's not in the sense that he's trying to talk about here. Let's be frank. Benjamin Doyle here believes in the sterilization of children. He believes in the mutilation of children. But that's supposed to be politically correct these days. That's actually an opinion that's not remotely controversial in this day and age, which is the problem. The fact that that is literal harm to children, and that's something that he promotes regularly. That's actually some of the core areas that he focuses on. And yet somehow he and his ideological views and the queer community who subscribe to said views are not a danger to children. Just because you're not a danger in one respect doesn't mean you're not a danger in another. And that's the problem here, is he is put under a microscope more so than maybe the average queer person in Parliament. Certainly more so than the likes of Grant Robertson, for example. Not that he's in Parliament anymore. But he's put under a microscope because this sort of behaviour online is concerning, especially when you consider the fact that he promotes that he is an activist for the sterilization of children and the mutilation of them as they grow up. That's what he stands for. And he can sugarcoat that and call it gender-affirming care if he likes, but in practice, that's exactly what it is. It's saying, hey, look, you're a 9-year-old. You're coming in to your puberty time, let's consider putting you on puberty blockers so that you're not forced to accept a gender that you don't align with, even if, as of right now, you're completely okay with your gender. When you're 12, 13, 14, that might change. So let's stunt your growth. Let's ensure that you don't grow up, that you don't go through puberty until you're absolutely sure what you want to be. And then, if you decide that you don't want to be a boy anymore, or you don't want to be a girl anymore, we will put you on a pathway, a medical plan towards a lifetime of dependence on the pharmaceutical companies, on our healthcare system, and ensure that we chop you up as soon as you're eligible. That's what he believes for. That's what he advocates for. But no, he's not a danger to anyone, least of all children.
I have been targeted due to both my identity as a queer and non-binary parent and my public platform as an outspoken member of Parliament. In particular, images of my child from my private Instagram account have been taken without permission, removed from their original context, and shared online in misleading and manipulative ways.
Now, firstly, the idea that they were taken from his private account is a lie, because it would have been impossible for us to get our hands on those images if the account was private, unless, of course, they were taken by someone who he allowed to see that private account. And we all know that didn't happen, because we know who was responsible for the story breaking, and that's the last person, Benjamin Doyle here, would agree to allow see the images on that account. The reality is this is a lie that the Green Party and Benjamin himself have been upholding over the last week and a half, that this account was private, it was always private, and that the use of these images was done for malicious intents, that people went out of their way to leak them, to disparage him, to target him, to abuse him, everything under the sun. That's simply not the case. The reality is someone went and saw his account when it was public, took screenshots of many, if not all, of the images, found some that were concerning and raised questions, and then started to discuss them in the public eye. As far as I'm concerned, an image that is published to a public domain with public settings being reused by anyone else is completely above board, so long as it's not illegal, right? The fact that your child was in those images is on you, Benjamin. Not on them who shared the image, on you, because you're the one that shared it publicly. So that's on you. Now, we have to acknowledge here that you yourself blurred your child's face or blacked out your child's face. So that goes a ways towards hiding the identity, even though we can directly connect them to you. So unless they know that it's your child, no one will know anyway. So to varying degrees, the images were already partially censored, so many of the people sharing them probably felt no need to do any more censoring of the child. However, they used those images because they were concerned for the child. They were concerned for other children. Unless you came out and you alleviated those concerns. You chose not to. You chose to send out the Green Party to run defense. You chose to send out your own Green Party supporters to run defense, as they demonized half of the country. They demonized, well-intentioned New Zealanders who were just asking questions. That's what you did. All of this is on you. You can't demonize people and blame others for the situation that you are in.
Context is key, and something that has been deliberately ignored and twisted by some incredibly bad faith actors looking for an excuse to punch down on someone who represents something they don't agree with. Marginalised communities often reclaim or subvert language in order to exist unapologetically. I recognise that Busy is not a term all rainbow people use or like, but it is one that is commonly understood and appreciated by my friends and community. For me, this term is wordplay and represents the combination of my masculine and feminine qualities as a non-binary person, someone whose gender doesn't fit into a strict category. It is also a satirical in-joke referencing pop music, drag culture, Bond novels, and 1960s cinema, made about myself with people who know me in mind. The vast majority of New Zealanders will not tolerate violent and malicious rhetoric in our country. They will not accept toxic conspiracies which attempt to bully and threaten queer people out of public life.
Look, I'll accept his explanation for how he likes to use bussy. I'll accept it. I'm a reasonable person, and I will accept it. That doesn't mean that the questions asked about it weren't valid. Hell, you know how different this could have gone down if you had to come out on, let's say, Monday afternoon, lunchtime? Hell, Saturday, Sunday, before the media decided to talk about it? You know, imagine if you came out and said that then. You could have stopped a lot of people speculating. You could have got a lot of people such as myself on board with that. Because the first time that I covered this topic, or this issue on YouTube at the very least, was Monday. Last week, that is. Monday. And I did not have that context you've just provided, and had you have provided it sooner, I would have used it. And I would have focused on the other areas of concern. The other areas which, as of yet, you haven't addressed. The other areas which do indeed focus on the fact that you aren't taking accountability, you aren't understanding and acknowledging why people are concerned. The certain use of certain symbols. As far as I'm aware, you may cover that a little bit later, but I'm not 100% sure. People had valid questions. All they wanted from you were some answers to front up, but you hid away. Hiding away when there are questions that need to be answered will only lead to more speculation and reflect more poorly on you. So, you should have come out sooner. You should have given this explanation for the use of bussy at least, because I think on a human level I can understand that, I can respect that. But I would also note, you've then decided to use this account, which is relying on such terms, which is relying on other things which are undoubtedly sexual innuendo, and associating your child with that account regardless, even if you're not referring to your child specifically as bussy, right? But then there are a range of other concerns we could raise about your child, such as a particular sign that I can think of reading, "I love my trans kotiro," which means, are you having this young child and transitioning them? Because the number of trans people who have trans children is concerningly improbable. So again, that raises more concerns about, are you a danger to children? Because if this child's going to end up with no dick one day, I think we can probably blame that on you already.
I refuse to be disappeared by hate. We have a choice as members of Parliament to reject this imported culture war of hate and division. We can and must do better than this, because that is what the people of Aotearoa deserve. I'm happy to take your questions.
Do you believe you've done anything wrong with you?
No, I don't.
Do you believe there was anything problematic about any of the posts that you made on your social media, and why have you deleted so many?
In the context of that old account, my personal account, and the posts that you're talking about, they were made in reference to me, about me and my life, and they have been taken wildly out of context and manipulated.
Do you understand why people think it was inappropriate to have a picture of a child accompanied by that word?
The context of that series of images is about me, a reference to me and my nickname or my persona, and the various many things that go on in my life.
And so this is what I was alluding to before, is it doesn't matter what the actual context is, he's refusing to understand and appreciate why people were raising concerns. Because if he acknowledges that people had valid reason for raising concerns, then he can't play the victim, right? His entire position right now is that he has done absolutely nothing wrong. He's a victim, and this is only a story because he's being targeted by transphobic, homophobic bigots who want to silence him. Acknowledging that people were not being entirely unreasonable and that there were serious questions that needed to be answered, that would require him to take some accountability, and he's got absolutely no interest in accountability. Leftism is increasingly less interested in accountability because it's rooted in postmodernist ideology these days. Truth is what you make it. There is no such thing as objectivity.
A screenshot of the different things that are happening for me at that time. When it's taken out of context and manipulated by bad faith actors to look a certain way, that's what's going to happen.
A lot of people take issue with,
Sorry.
people take issue with the words Busy Galore. What's your definition of Busy Galore?
So Bussy is a reference to me, as I've said. Busy Galore is a wordplay of the character from the James Bond novel Goldfinger, Pussy Galore.
And you've said that it's basically you living your best life. But it's a lot more explicit than that, isn't it?
No, it's just plainly said, it's just about me. It's a reference to myself and no one else.
So in your opening statements, you have said it's simply me living my best life. It is more explicit than that. It is a play on the words boy and pussy. Do you accept that?
In this context, that is not what it is. In this context, it is a reference to me and a nickname that my friends and people who know me understand as a reference to me.
Can you see why people might take issue with that you're picking and choosing what definition you feel is appropriate?
When an image and words are taken out of a context and manipulated to seem a certain way, I can see how people might get that impression.
You mentioned the concerns that have been raised online with you, just so you can address them outright. There have been some concerns raised about the use of the spiral emoji. Are you aware of the connotations of that online and its links to child sexual harm?
In Aotearoa, we are surrounded by Māori motifs such as the koru. I don't know a single person who would look at a spiral in this country earnestly and think anything as malicious as that. I was not aware of that conspiracy, and I would only use that, as most people would, as a reference to a koru. And
Here's the thing, he's calling it a conspiracy, even though the app itself, which he's used it on, identifies it as exactly what the reporter stated in reference to such abusive material. That is what it means on that app. Now, I can appreciate that there may be some Māori, there may be some people who use that to reference a form of koru or whatever. But if I'm being completely honest, I've followed quite a few Māori accounts in my day. He is the only individual who's ever used it. The only individual I've ever seen use it. Now, there was someone trying to say that somebody from Hollywood promoting a movie or promoting something may have used it, but then they used it in a very specific context where you could deduce what it was referencing. Whereas here we've got Benjamin Doyle on an account filled with sexual innuendo with a name that he's now kind of cleared up the context behind what it means. But a name that raised concerns, imagery that raised concerns, political activism which raises concerns. If you then also see the symbol, what are you more likely to think it's about? Because he is someone who associates himself with children a lot. He is focused on the early childhood education portfolio for the Green Party. He has been a high school teacher. He advocates for, as I was saying earlier, gender affirming care, which frankly is just a polite way of saying the mutilation and sterilization of children. So am I more likely to think it's a koru or something related to Māori culture? Or am I going to think that it's related to this kind of abuse, right? Because there are other posts there which one references, why don't you talk to us about cheese, which again is another subtle reference to such abusive material. And cheese kind of came out of nowhere. If you want to have more insight into all of that, go and follow Tuiteka on X. That's 2ETEKA. That is the primary source for all information related to this. You don't have to agree with all of it. You don't have to claim that everything that Tuiteka might say is accurate, but that is the primary source for this, and we'll go into all of this stuff more in depth for you if you desire that insight. But the point being here is this isn't some conspiracy. People have raised concerns about the use of this spiral emoji. You have refused to comment on this spiral emoji until now. You have sent out the Green Party to gaslight the country until now. And we're just supposed to take you at your word. I'm sorry, it's not that simple. You have to earn our trust. You have to earn the respect when you've just spent the last week and a half not showing us any respect at all.
You mentioned at the beginning that the party advised you to remove the social media account. Looking back, do you regret not doing that?
I could never have predicted or foreseen the level of violent hate that I have been receiving because of the manipulation and taking of images of my child. We could not have prepared for that, and we could never have predicted it.
They told you to delete the account, so do you regret not doing that?
The Green Party said that I would face homophobia, I would face hate. We didn't predict that I would face this level of violent conspiracy-fueled threats to my life.
Would it be fair to say that when Georgina came into Parliament, she too faced the same type of vitriol? What she did was put it in a book before she turned up, but still got the backlash from the larger, wider community who do not have access to the hapori takatāpui, and that is probably the basic issue. They don't have access. They don't have access to the kupu, to the reo of takatāpui, te ao takatāpui, and that's what you're having to do now, is to explain to the wider majority of people what it is to be takatāpui.
The rainbow community, as you've said, is a really diverse community. I don't represent every single rainbow person. We are a rich and diverse group of people, much like any community, and there are going to be differences and variations in our language, our identities, our beliefs. This is an example of that. I am just a member of a group of people in the rainbow community. That's right, we're not a monolith.
Why didn't you take the Greens' advice and pull that page down?
I came to Parliament with the backing of people to be my authentic self and to represent the communities that I come from. I have been supported the whole way through this by people who know me and care for me to not relent on being unapologetic on the things that matter. I am not going to be disappeared from public life, and queer people should not have to minimise ourselves.
So what exactly was it that advised you to take it down?
Pardon me?
Who exactly was it that advised you to take it down?
I was advised when I was a candidate, which was a fair while back, and I actually can't recall. It was leadership from the Green Party.
And how did that conversation go?
The advice I received was that coming into public office, I would probably face homophobia and queerphobia based on my identity, and that for the interests of my well-being, I might like to take it down to avoid nasty comments. They trusted me to have the authority and autonomy over that decision myself.
You say you refused to be disappeared by hate. Did you ever consider stepping down over the last week or so?
No.
Why not? Can you just explain that decision?
Yeah. Because this is really important, this fight that we're having right now. If I were to step down and to move away from this space, our community would lose a voice, and we don't have much representation in here, especially non-binary takatāpui people. I have the backing of my community, I have the backing of my whānau, their confidence. The people have reached out and supported me and said that they will wrap around me, and I am here to fight for the things that matter to us and our community.
Despite your explanation in your opening remarks, there'll still be some people who are confused why you refer to yourself using that term. How would you unpack that for them? How would you reassure them that there's nothing more nefarious to it?
Sure. Many cultures and people and communities and friends use nicknames or kind of tongue-in-cheek references to each other in closed group environments and circles of friends. In my community, which was quite large on that Instagram account of friends who understood for a long time that it's kind of a nickname or persona for me, much like, I don't know, a character like Fred Dagg, who is kind of a obscure pop culture reference. The name is kind of tongue-in-cheek. It's simply put, just a persona or identity and part of my identity and kind of online presence.
The severity of the threats, could you explain the severity of the threats? Was police involvement required? How much of it was, seemed close to realised?
Sorry, there are multiple parts to that question. Could you please ask it again?
The severity of the threats, how much was sort of potentially realised threats and required police involvement?
Sure. So I've been following a process guided by Parliamentary Security and the DPS around referring all threats through that specific pathway, and it's not my position to determine whether or not they're valid. That has been followed by that process, and I've entrusted them to follow it correctly.
What do you get to engage with police at all? Have police been involved?
I have been engaging with parliamentary security specifically, and then they have been the conduit for the correct process.
You've described the level of hate that you've received as poisonous, transphobic hate. Do you believe that is also the case when it comes to Winston Peters' criticism?
I would rather have a conversation kanohi ki te kanohi with the Right Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, Mr Peters, because I believe that we can't resolve anything through bickering or in the media. I would rather have a restorative conversation with him directly.
What did you make of his comments?
Pardon me?
What did you make of his comments?
To be honest, I've been very overwhelmed with many pieces of information, comments about me, so I haven't taken a great amount of time to reflect specifically on his
How
words.
important is it that you continue to use those words, living your true, authentic self, and allow the rangatahi takatapui to continuously hear those words, given that we've got such a high level of suicide amongst our rangatahi? How important is it for them to hear that?
Identity is essential for all people's well-being. The rainbow community have had our identities, especially takatapui people, have had our identities stripped of us. It is so important that I show up authentically as myself to represent our communities so they can see themselves in this place, which is a very hostile environment.
There are a few things I want to cover there very quickly. Whoever this reporter is asking these questions, the one that just asked it about, how our suicide rates amongst young people are bad, this person's here purely to write a puff piece, to write a piece that's supportive of Benjamin Doyle. It's quite clear. The problem with reporters is or journalists, whatever you want to call them, the problem is if you can establish what their position is based on their questions alone, you should not be reading them, because they are there to share opinion pieces and share propaganda, nothing more. So that person has the credibility and the journalistic ethics of communist Russia or CCP-run China. So I wouldn't trust a word coming from them. But the other point I'd make is he hasn't had any conversation with police, meaning if any of these threats against him were actually valid, then that would have already taken place, very likely. So we can deduce from that the vast majority, if not all, of the threats against him and his family are mere keyboard warriors trying to give him shit, which most people in his position will experience to varying degrees. I myself am no exception. The reality is the police won't or can't do anything unless there is something to go on. And here it doesn't appear that there is. I'd also note that he doesn't want to comment on what Winston Peters himself has actually said. He doesn't want to, call Winston Peters out explicitly. And I would reckon, these reckons, and I would conclude from that Winston Peters hasn't done anything wrong. And he knows that. But in trying to elaborate on what he's taken issue with from Winston Peters, he would be exposing that Winston Peters was only acting in what I could call good faith. Sure, politically motivated in the sense that it is an opposition MP that's at the heart of this, but he was doing it from the right place. He was raising questions that needed to be raised when the media wouldn't. And that's what Winston Peters did. Benjamin Doyle acknowledges that, and so won't go into it too deeply publicly, because that would expose that this entire position that he is in is of his own making and isn't some witch hunt against him, isn't some conspiracy against him. Seriously, they just throw a conspiracy around like it means something. These days, being called a conspiracy theorist or something being called a conspiracy is meaningless. All it is deflection from accountability.
That doesn't mean I should stop in this relentless pursuit to present an authentic version of a politician.
Politically naive, do you believe that you used good political judgment throughout this, in regards to your language on social media?
So all of those references on social media were before I was a member of Parliament, so of course I didn't have any kind of political... And that's when I received that advice, when I was a candidate.
And you stand by your political judgment throughout that?
Yes, because I could never have predicted that people would end up with conspiracies threatening to kill me and the safety of my child online.
To be completely clear though, with hindsight, you wouldn't do anything differently.
It's really important to make it clear that queer people should not have to erase their identities and minimise ourselves for the comfort of others. We deserve to exist in this world authentically as ourselves without risk of being manipulated and misportrayed and weaponised against each other.
Are you aware, are you the party aware of the agency businessman behind the X profile that was a lot of this originated from? Tui Tika, I believe?
I only was made aware of that article as I came down, so I don't actually have any comment on it, sorry.
Have you considered any legal action, be it harmful digital communications or defamation against, the person behind the account or anyone else?
I'm aware there are multiple avenues that we can take to address this situation. I haven't made any decisions about that, and I don't want to comment on that here right now.
It wasn't just the language that you use and the way that you express yourself. It's actually that you did that alongside photographs of your child. Do you accept it was wrong to post photographs of your child alongside sexual slang like that?
The words I used in my private account historically were not sexual words. They were nicknames and references to myself. The images of my child...
Busy, and the caption was Busy Galore.
Which is a reference to a Bond movie.
You're highly sexualised to see an eggplant.
And that image is a picture of Crocs, my feet, and then a coffee. So I think they've been taken out of context and manipulated to fit this rhetoric to attack the queer community and portray us as unsafe.
Actually, very quickly there, what Benjamin's trying to say there is there's one image that's in like a carousel, a bit like the other ones, where it says swipe to see an eggplant. Obviously, most of you will be familiar with what an eggplant refers to. It's a long, often long, round shape, confused with the sausage from time to time. But it was swipe to see an eggplant, and then the next image is a coffee. That doesn't even make sense. You can't deny that the intention of swipe to see an eggplant looking downwards, as males may often take imagery of that kind, you can't pretend that that's not supposed to be a sexually charged joke, right? Be it a joke or otherwise, you can't pretend that just because the next image is a coffee, that doesn't make that first caption inappropriate, right? Because it is. And this was a public account at the time. So that's what this is. He's deflecting from it once again, and it just shows that he's not someone that wants to take any accountability, who wants to acknowledge that people had valid concerns and that all he needed to do was come out and accept some responsibility, answer some questions, and then move on. Because clearly he's not committed a crime here. There's no evidence of that. So all he needs to do here is answer questions and move on. That's all he had to do. He chose not to do that. He allowed all of this to spiral out of control. So now we're at the point where his position's arguably untenable. But of course, the Greens don't believe in accountability, so he's going to be fine. But yeah, this is all of his own making. But he's approaching this as if none of it's of his own making. All of it's just targeted harassment. He's completely blame-free.
It does have a sexual connotation to a lot of people.
I recognise that a lot of people won't know the word bussy, and so they'll be hearing about it for the first time now, and that some people don't use or like it or have a particular definition. Every time I have ever used that term, it has been a reference to me and my nickname.
It's never been sexual in any way in the form that...
It's a nickname or like a drag persona. It's a caricature of myself.
You've never meant it in a sexual way.
I've always meant it as a reference to myself.
Do you have to see how many threats you've faced and whether that has increased over time? How that's changed?
No, I can't. I can tell you that I've received hundreds of threats, but I can't give you specific details.
How did you get the nickname?
In community with friends through kind of hanging out and laughing and joking and being interested in pop culture.
Have you taken down that page?
Pardon me?
Will you or have you taken down your page?
I have, except for one post when I became a Member of Parliament to say I'm now a Member of Parliament, I haven't been using that page. It's an inactive page.
Last question.
Delete it.
Last question.
Sorry.
Why not delete the page? Delete the page.
Because it's not in use currently, and I'm not prepared to eradicate myself or minimise myself for the comfort or narrative of homophobic people trying to attack the queer community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And there we go. That was Benjamin Doyle's press conference inside Parliament today. Look, if I were to sum this up, I don't think Benjamin needs to resign because of the content of these posts. I think he needs to resign because he hasn't been sincere. He made a big issue, a big deal out of being his true, authentic self, when, I mean, his very being, his ideological views go against that entirely. You know, gender ideology is very much anti being your true, authentic self. It's about adopting a caricature of yourself, a caricature of something in order to cope with the harsh realities that are life. For me, gender ideology is something that people who are looking for a coping mechanism are what they reach out to, right? They don't know how to make sense of the world. They don't know how to make sense of themselves, that self-doubt they have. And so they adopt something which is not a true representation of themselves, but enables them to feel a sense of comfort. And they go all in on that. I myself, when I was a teenager, had a very similar experience that was ideological in nature, but not gender ideology. You know, I know exactly what it's like to reach out and grab on to something that makes you feel comfortable. Even if it means rejecting who you truly are, what your authentic self is. It makes you feel comfortable. It makes you feel like that you can do anything. But that doesn't mean you're being authentic. That doesn't mean that you're not harming yourself. That doesn't mean you're not harming others. That doesn't mean you're subscribing to something that is inherently based in truth. Because gender ideology is not something that's based in truth. To summarize, I think this press conference from Benjamin was decent. I think there were several members of our media who did a reasonable job asking the questions that needed to be made. However, these questions should have occurred a long time ago. They should have been thrown at Benjamin the day they broke the story, if not sooner. And they should have stated point blank in those articles last week that he refuses to comment or he has not got back to us yet, to make it clear that he is avoiding answering these questions. Now, for the most part, he just repeated the same answer over and over, which is typical of politicians. But a point that I want to make here is that he is not taking accountability. He is not accepting. He is not accepting. He is not being reasonable. He is not acknowledging the fact that people within our community had valid reason to want some answers. He is pretending like absolutely none of the controversy is on his shoulders. Absolutely none of it requires him to take any accountability. That all of it is rooted entirely in opposition to his ideological views, in opposition to trans people, queer people, and so on. All of it is designed to victimize him and keep him quiet, to silence him, to discourage him from advocating for what it is that he is advocating for. Finally, what I take away from that is that, yes, he's not wrong. There are many people in his community that are backing him, right? They back him and they want him to be their voice in Parliament, just as that's why they've elected the Green Party, right? We don't have that same amount of backing on the right for people opposed to him. There's only one party that is staunchly outspoken against this kind of ideology, and they only have 8 seats. We need far more people, one, to be standing for Parliament with the intention to push back against this, and two, we need those people to be elected. We don't have that. Right now, we have New Zealand First, and then a very socially liberal ACT and National Party. Right? They are both very socially liberal. And whilst you may get a little bit of pushback on some things in like our curriculum, for the most part, they are very much all in on gender ideology, on ensuring that puberty blockers can be given to children, that we progress this progressive gender ideology and implement it into our health system, amongst other things. We need more people who are going to push back against that. And right now, we've got very few people on the right who are doing that. We've got very few people on the right who are voting for the parties that will do that. And right now, there's only one of those parties in Parliament. And they are only 8 seats strong. So we need to make a change in that respect if we're gonna tackle this, because if people like Benjamin are going to remain in our Parliament, if the Greens are going to continue to put more people like Benjamin in their party list, then we need people to speak up and be the opposition to that. Even if we're in government, we need to be the opposition to that. Because right now, we are letting down women and girls, we are letting down children, we are letting down all of the very many people who are impacted and victimised by gender ideology in particular. So, Benjamin Doyle, whilst I will accept some of your explanations, some of your attempts to put things in context, I will not accept your dismissal of the people who have been asking these questions. I will not accept that you have no accountability in this. And you've shown that you do not have the ability to look at the general populace, to look at society, and understand why they may take issue with your account and why they raise concerns. Instead, you've decided that they are the bad guys, that you are not responsible in any way whatsoever for your actions, and as such, you've done nothing wrong. I will not accept that. And neither should you.